it was, I don't know, a helicopter came and then these people were jet skiing and it was just too much. And the dog was barking and it was it was just too hectic for me. Okay, here we
I'm so excited about the upcoming semester,
Inshallah,
inshallah.
inshallah, Allah Kareem.
Can
All
you
right,
tell us a little bit about your course you're going to be teaching?
yeah, inshallah. After class, inshallah.
Oh, okay. Because I
All right.
figured it was better before. Sorry.
Yeah, well, because we're recording. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum. So, inshallah, we're going to be doing the tafsir for this ayah. No, this ayah. What, wait, what are we doing here? Oh, we're still on this ayah. Write this one. ما جعل الله من بحيرة ولا سائبة ولا وصيلة ولا حام ولكن الذين كفروا يفترون على الله الكذب وأكثرهم لا يعقلون. Now, al-Qurtubi, he actually wanted to get into a different topic, so he went and started talking about al-Waqf, and which is another name for al-Ahbas. And we had mentioned before that Al-Qurtubi had quoted, or at least he mentioned that Abu Hanifa had regarded that there's no such thing as waqf. And we said waqf is designating a certain amount of your money to be in donation when you didn't officially donate it, at least to really give it away, but you considered and designated a certain amount of money, a certain amount of your property, or one specific property to basically be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / for the sake of the ummah. So you basically would assign it. So Abu Hanifa had considered that this is not permissible and based it on the ayah. But we had mentioned that the students of Abu Hanifa, which basically is Abu Yusuf and Zufar, we talked about Abu Yusuf, who Abu Yusuf was, and we went in some details with that. And we said that there were other evidences, including the majority of the scholars, including ahadith, that there were some Sahaba that even the Prophet ﷺ had permitted that there would be some amount of money that would be designated for donation / for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / for the ummah. And we said this hadith right there, أنه استأذن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في أن يتصدق بسهمه بخيبر. And that was basically the main quote. And we said that this hadith is Sahih, and the Prophet ﷺ tells him احبس الأصل. So in other words, what you're going to designate as a donation is basically the net, and وسبل الثمرة, and the rest basically the profit, you're basically going to take. That way you would know what really is designated and not necessarily confusing the wealth all put together. So the other piece of it, we wanted to talk about I wanted to go out of this one for a little bit and just quote this one. Let's look at this quote because it's important for us to learn a key thing in understanding deen. وأما ما احتج به أبو حنيفة من الآية فلا حجة فيه لأن الله سبحانه إنما عاب عليهم أن تصرفوا بعقولهم بغير شرع توجه إليهم أو تكليف فرض عليهم في قطع طريق الانتفاع وإذهاب نعمة الله تعالى وإزالة المصلحة التي للعباد في تلك الإبل، وبهذا فارقت هذه الأمور الأحباس والأوقاف. I want you to look at this quote because this quote is actually key to understanding how we understand property, how we understand our relationship with Sharia, how we understand our relationship even with Qiyas. So what Abu Hanifa wanted to do was called Qiyas, an analogy. What is the analogy? So analogy and al-Qiyas is basically considering a certain ruling to be in such a way based on another ruling. In other words, you're using a certain paradigm, you're using a certain comparison, you're then using these comparisons, these similarities in order to take about a certain conclusion. And Abu Hanifa basically used this one and said, well, just as they had designated the camels, certain animals in a certain way, and designated it for a religious / ritual purposes, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically said, ولكن الذين كفروا على الله يفترون على الله الكذب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called it لكن الذين كفروا, he called them كفروا, and he said that they were creating blasphemy. It was something that they themselves had designated and not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Hanifa wanted to say, well, just as you cannot designate an animal, you cannot designate a certain property for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then at the same idea, in the same manner, you cannot necessarily designate a certain property or a certain animal or whatever it is and call it that it's for ritual or even for religious purposes. So I want you to look at this one. And al-Qurtubi wanted to respond to Abu Hanifa and said, well, what Abu Hanifa had used as an evidence, he doesn't have a point in it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically criticized the people, the disbelievers basically, that they had used their mind in a way that was not considered as the legal or the acceptable manner by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore, whether we're speaking about obligating themselves in something or even forbidding something on themselves where they were supposed to be making use of, or even wasting the different eulogies or the different blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them, or even taking away the different interests that they were supposed to be using for the sake of basically for the sake of the different servants, for the sake of people, to somehow forbid it. And that was the main problem. So right here, al-Qurtubi wanted to let us know that even when we're speaking about ritual, there's supposed to be some kind of a benefit. There's supposed to be an interest. You cannot necessarily just consider some kind of an inspiration as the main paradigm or as the main center, and let that delude you in thinking that that's what makes Sharia. So he wanted to let us, see the pattern and see the paradigm right here. And he said, but that what Abu Hanifa had used wasn't actually an evidence that is an acceptable evidence, because the main reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had criticized them was really because they wanted to forbid something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had even given them. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the ni'mah. So under what kind of analogy would you say that using this ni'mah is forbidden, and under what kind of analogy would you say that an evil thing is going to be a blessing? So if something is evil or something is good, that's to be seen and defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not by our own analogy, by our own mind. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded something as permissible, then that's supposed to be the key source and the key lens to defining right and wrong. It's basically al-wahy and not our own analogy. Okay, so just to mention this one, and of course, And there was another evidence. I don't want to go in details with that one because you could see that there were some other scholars that responded to, and many other scholars actually responded that it is evident that doing waqf is permissible, and therefore, even of course, his own students had left that opinion. So don't necessarily want to go in details with that one. Okay. Okay. Let's skip these parts and we're going to go for point number 5. He said اختلف المجيزون للحبوس فيما للمحبس من التصرف. What happened? So let's just say Sister Umayya says, I have a house that I own and I have a car that I own. And she said, I want this to be a waqf. Okay. And therefore, if she had said that this is going to be a waqf, the question is, can she use the car or can she use that house that she had designated as waqf? What if she said that this was a will? She wanted to make it a will and say this would be something for an Islamic school or an organization to use and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, what's the difference between a will and a waqf? Okay, there's a difference. The will would not take place in distribution until the person is dead. Okay, this would be until the person is dead. And the will should not exceed the limit of 1/3 of the property, or at least the net worth. In other words, you cannot donate all of your wealth in a will, but you can donate only 1/3 of that amount. But let's just say they did, and they said, all the house goes to this organization. We would say only 1/3 is deducted, and the rest is distributed based on the rulings of inheritance. Okay, so what about al-waqf? Il-waqf could happen during a person's life. So if we're talking about waqf, I'm going to say, this land that I own, that side of it, and I will allocate the amount and the area and basically the borders of which amount and which area I'm allocating for waqf. So I'll say it's this area, this amount, and this is waqf for this organization, for example. Then in that situation, this amount that is allocated for waqf, even during my life, I could actually do al-waqf. Okay? But the question is, can I use this area and can my children in the future use that area that I had designated for waqf? Well, wait a minute. What does waqf even mean? So the word waqf comes from the root waqafa, which means to stand. But when you're saying to stand, it doesn't really give the meaning. So waqf is more of a technical term. It basically means you had designated that area or allocated that area for, let's call it religious purposes, for a donation for the sake of the ummah, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you are basically terminating your right of usage or your right of ownership for that area or for that property or to that property. And by you terminating that ownership, now you make the ownership basically to belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but of course, the one that would take the ownership right now, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it would be the ummah on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there was a waqf ministry in pretty much most Muslim countries. It would basically be overseen by the government. So the government would take over this waqf and basically make sure that it stays within the area of public property and slash waqf, and therefore no one else can claim ownership, can claim the property to them or whatsoever, because there would be legal documents proving that this is waqf, meaning public property. But this public property, it doesn't become the type of public property where anybody could just use it in any way or shape or form. It becomes public property, and there would be basically, there would be a type of, let's say, allocation that the person that probably did this waqf, let's say Noura had bought some kind of a building in Dimashq. Okay, in Damascus, she bought a huge building, and she said this building would be just for orphans. So therefore, we can't use it as a school unless it's for the orphans. We can't use it as, I don't know, a building, a government building, or probably some kind of a mall. No, it would only be for the orphans. That's it. Then in that situation, it would be allocated in a specific way, in a specific usage, and that would be the type of waqf. Now, let's say, Noura probably later she said, well, I'm going to get this property. Yeah, I allocated it, but right now I got a new idea. And this idea, I will use that building as a mall. And then I'll probably let that money that's coming in from the mall probably be something that I'll probably buy another place to allocate as waqf. Now, since you had already allocated that as waqf, you cannot go back on to that idea. So there was a ministry of al-awqaf in the Muslim governments, and that was basically making sure they're keeping track of all the allocated properties, all the allocated wealth to be for waqf, and how it basically was also maintained. So certainly there was a special maintenance, there were special archives, records of al-awqaf, etc. So you would have, even in Palestine, you would have in Syria as well, there are certain areas that are outside al-masajid. So this isn't necessarily a masjid. The waqf can be a masjid, the waqf can be a Quran, the waqf can be a building, the waqf can probably even be means of transportation, all these different things. They're different than other government buildings and other government property, because the government itself would, within its treasury, there will be different types of money and how and where this money is coming from. So not all money that the government basically has in their treasury, they could just use for anything. So zakah money, you don't build streets with zakah money, for example. So certainly the government would have zakah money within its treasury, but that amount of zakah money is to only be spent on specific areas and not necessarily for any area, like building streets and probably creating the sewage system or building hospitals, etc. No, zakah money is allocated for specific areas, for 8 specific areas. Therefore, we cannot use and confuse how this money is used, even if the government has a hold of this money. Same thing if we're talking about perhaps money that was coming in maybe from the military, or money that was coming in perhaps maybe different ways that the government was probably thinking, maybe using some taxes, maybe some kharaj, some different types of means to create money, maybe building some kind of malls or some kind of commercial areas to make money coming in for the government. Now, that should not be confused with other money. So when you're looking at the government system, the whole area of money and how it is distributed and how money is coming in, and how we're talking about here government money, it's completely different than the system that you would find within the government today. It's completely different. It has its own rules. It has its own classification, and it cannot be considered whatsoever compared to what the government would basically, in secular governments, would distribute their way of treasury and all of that. It's completely different. Okay, I know some people had some questions right there. Is it both for men and, yes, both men and women can make waqf, but you would have to own that money. So if you don't have your own money, then you cannot make waqf on behalf of someone else. You would have to own that money, just like you cannot donate from someone else's money, same thing. So if you have your own money and you decided to make waqf, and right now, hey, Syria, yesterday, my husband was telling me that the average income in Syria is $25 a month. Just imagine that. So to buy property, to do waqf, to do any of that right now, you can probably, with maybe $5,000, who knows what you could do in Syria to help. Probably right now, we've got a lot of refugees. We have a lot of orphans, definitely a lot of families that are dislocated. So just think of that. Okay. Was it like this during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, managed by the government? So the Prophet ﷺ himself was the government in teaching them how to basically do the governance. Okay. So that was basically there. Okay. Sister Umayya, you had something to ask.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You hit the point I want to discuss it with you, but here in America, who take care of this waqf, or as a
question. So in America, we don't have waqf. So there is no specific organization, or at least a specific area. So you cannot necessarily do waqf in America to be used as the word waqf, but the way that it is done in legally, let's say in the US, is that you would basically donate it to a certain nonprofit organization, like let's say maybe your nearest masjid, if it's a nonprofit organization, and then the nonprofit organization would recognize that this is waqf and would basically oversee that this is used in the designated manner based on Islam. So in America, the only way that you could use waqf is through a nonprofit organization to oversee that this waqf is basically as the person that did the waqf, as they had basically designated it for. So that would be a general donation to that nonprofit organization. Now, nonprofit organizations.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Would that nonprofit be able to sell that house and use the proceeds to do something else with it?
The nonprofit organization cannot work as a profit organization. Okay, so let's just say, okay, Gems of Light wanted to make money coming in. Okay, we cannot work as a profit organization. So we cannot open, I don't know, a Starbucks, for example, or a coffee shop and say all the profit that's coming in from the coffee shop would basically be coming in for the nonprofit organization. In the US, now here I'm not talking about Islam here, but in the US, at least based on Minnesota's law, I don't know about other states, but in Minnesota's law, you cannot have a nonprofit organization have its income coming in from some kind of a property, not property, but some kind of a profit. Okay, the only way, at least in Minnesota, that you can fund a nonprofit organization if it's donated items. So the way that they would do it is things like a thrift store, like Savers, like Goodwill, like those areas. People would donate the items, then they would sell the items that is donated, and then that money that was basically coming in and generated from the items that was donated, that can become an income to that organization. So if, let's say, let's just assume, okay, Noura donated her car, okay, and then we'd thought, what is Gems of Light going to use and do with the car? So we basically said, okay, well, thank you, Noura, for donating your car. We're going to sell the car, and whatever number amount we're going to be getting, we're going to use that as the donation for Gems of Light, for example. That's legal. Okay. That would be legal. And same thing with other nonprofit organizations. Doesn't have to be just Gems of Light. Okay.
What about Goodwill?
Goodwill works the same way. So Goodwill, you would donate clothes, shoes, furniture, whatever it is, and then Goodwill would basically sell the items, and whatever money that they would have, they would pay the workers, the employees, the buildings, and allocate some of the money for the churches, etc. So that's what they would use. A lot of the churches work that way. Believe it or not, a lot of those very rich people, they open up churches not because they want to open up churches, but because that's another way, it's another form of money laundering. A lot of these rich people, they open churches for money laundering purposes. Ironically, this is how they play the game. So let's say a rich person owned, let's say, a car company. So this rich person, instead of paying all of that for taxes, what they would do is that they would open up a church or, let's say, a nonprofit organization, which can be educational, can be religious, can be, etc. And then this money that they owed in taxes, they would open up a church. That way, this money can go into really another business of theirs, which is the church. It's a nonprofit organization, but technically the way they play the game is that the money would go into a nonprofit organization. It would be 501c3. It would be tax deductible. And then they would basically let that money go into this 501c3, which is the church that they technically own. Yes, they have these board members, etc. But then, of course, this money that they had donated, they can claim it in their taxes. And then after claiming it in their taxes, they wouldn't necessarily owe money to the government. They would basically now consider that, well, I basically donated for this nonprofit organization, which technically they own, and it ends up really being another form of hey, they own the church, people are donating to the church, people are basically benefiting from the church, etc. And then this person is not necessarily a religious person, but that's the way that a lot of the rich people in the US would basically end up not paying a lot of taxes because they open up churches, they open up all of those in order to have the money instead of go into getting paid into taxes, they would basically pay it into the churches and the church, which is what they own, and that's creating money for them. So they basically end up really making money out of the church and putting their money in a legal way within the church. So yeah, just it's I hope it's not complicated, but that's not permissible in Islam. To play the game this way in Islam, I'm not talking about taxes, okay? I'm talking about here things like zakah, things like waqf. Waqf, that's the point that we're looking in right here. Can I use this waqf? Okay, so let's just assume that I allocated this money for, let's say, Gems of Light. Okay, can I use this property for personal reasons? The answer is no. If it's allocated for waqf, then I cannot use it for personal reasons. If it's allocated for waqf, then my children cannot use this for personal reasons, unless they were in need, okay? Unless they were in need. So that's the point that he's discussing right now in this fifth point. Let's see, someone's asking, but goodwill does what, Noura?
No, I already asked. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, so those companies like Savers, Goodwill, and thrift stores, they basically, what is that called? The famous one, Salvation Army. It basically most of it goes to the churches. And that's how they basically, by law, they cannot get a company or at least a profit organization funding their church. So they would basically use donated items. And of course, it's a smart way of making sure that even people are donating usable items and all of that. But anyhow, okay. اختلف المجيزون للحبس في مال المحبس من التصرف. So then they had differences of opinions. If a person were to allocate a certain amount of money, are they able to use that money and how much? Or even if it's a property, can I use that car? Can I use that house that I donated? In what is permissible? So let's see. Shafi'i had said, well, it is impermissible on the person that donated into waqf, and of course their property was donated, and therefore they cannot use, even if we're speaking about a slave. But of course, this person can يتولى صدقته وتكون بيده ليفرقها ويسبلها فيما أخرجها فيه. So what he was saying is that if basically the person had a slave, okay, and certainly or even a property, and in other words, a place that they were donating. So let's say Noura donated a property that she had bought in Damascus. And just to make sure that everything is going the right way and that it is basically distributed in the way that she was really hoping that she had allocated the money for. So she basically would oversee how that money is used, how much are the employees being paid? What about the person that's in the management? What about the person that is working? How much money are you basically paying in perhaps maybe bills, maybe utilities, whatever it is, want to oversee that. So can Noura oversee how everything is allocated, how everything is distributed? Yes, she can. So in that situation, it wouldn't necessarily be considered that she's taking over the property, but it would be considered that she is managing. So here we go. This is what he's saying. جائز له أن يتولى صدقته. So it's permissible for her to oversee. So whether we're speaking about raqabat al-abd here, whether we're speaking about, for example, the slave that she is donating, or basically the area that she had donated, etc. She wanted to see what was being, I guess, done right there. She has the right to do so and make sure that, hey, I would like to make sure that this is distributed as I had really wanted it to be distributed in, and would like to oversee that this waqf is properly used. That's permissible. Okay. So same thing, of course, Ali ibn Abi Talib, they were overseeing their sadaqah. Overseeing, meaning making sure that it was whatever that they had donated. They were basically managing that, yes, it's going to the right area. Yes, it's being used properly. Yes, it's not basically wasted, etc. That's permissible. Okay, and let's see Malik. He said, من حبس أرضا أو نخلا أو دارا على المساكين وكانت بيده يقوم بها ويكريها ويقسمها في المساكين. So basically here, Imam Malik said, whoever allocated a land, or even probably a set of trees, palm trees, or even a house, maybe like a property on certain poor people. And of course, this person can oversee and even rent a place or even distribute it on the poor people, in a certain way, basically oversee how this is all being managed. That's permissible, even though the person technically doesn't own it. Okay, even if they technically don't own it, but with waqf, they would have the right to oversee that this is basically used in the manner that they had wished for. So I think that's pretty fair. What do you think? Not everybody agrees, or what happened? Okay. All right, let's see. لا يجوز الوقف أن ينتفع بوقفه. Okay, let's see. لا يجوز للواقف أن ينتفع بوقفه. That a person that designated into his basically property or even wealth into waqf, they cannot benefit from it. So you can't use it for personal reasons, but you do have the right to manage that it is allocated towards basically the donation that you had selected it for. But you don't have the right to use it for personal reasons, because you had done it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you allocated it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore making it for personal use and using it for personal use is basically going back onto what you had allocated in terms of waqf, and therefore it's a form of going and returning basically what you had donated. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, العائد في هبته كالكلب يعود في قيئه. What does that mean? If a person gives a gift, okay, the Prophet ﷺ said, a person that goes back and takes their gift back is exactly like the dog that would vomit and then lick their vomit back again. Yuck, right? So the Prophet ﷺ was comparing that. In other words, if you give a person any gift, you shouldn't be asking to take it back. That's قلة أدب. And scholars had differences of opinions on whether it is haram or whether it is makruh. And then they had basically differences of opinions based on haram or makruh, on whether the property still becomes the ownership as part of the ownership of the other person or the person that it belonged to in the first place. Okay, let's see. So if that's the ownership being given as a gift, would the same thing be considered if we're talking about waqf? Yes, certainly. Okay, so what about وإنما يجوز له انتفاع إن شرط ذلك في الوقف? And now he's saying, well, the only time that it would be permissible for a person to use al-waqf if they had put us and stated a condition that they would be permitted to use it. So let's just say, going back to Noura's property in Damascus, and she said, this is waqf, but I would have the right to use it if needed. Okay? She basically had a title and whatever the agreement, and part of the agreement, it said limited, or let's say waqf, but a condition that if needed or if certain times necessary, I needed to use this. So she thought, well, yes, I live in America, but sometimes I would go on a vacation, my family and I, so we want to at least have a place to stay in. So at certain times I would basically say, hey, I'd like to have the area vacant because my family and I are coming. Can we use that? Yes, there can be conditional waqf to use it for basically certain, based on certain conditions. Okay. And the second one, أو أن يفتقر المحبس أو ورثته فيجوز لهم الأكل منه. Let's just say, so in situation, يفتقر المحبس. What happened? So that property was, let's just say, allocated for the poor. But that's when I was rich. But then all of a sudden I became poor. Now I really want that place because I have no other money. But I had already put it out for waqf. Can I use that place? You can use that place if you had basically become a needy person. You can use that place. Use it to sell it? No. Use it as the waqf. So you would use it to benefit from it. Not to sell it, but benefit from it. Okay? Same thing if your children, let's say in the future, the children, they were in need. They could use that place to basically give them the support that is needed. Okay, let's see right there. ذكر Ibn Habib عن Malik. Who's Ibn Habib? Well, Ibn Habib is one of the main Maliki scholars. عن مالك من حبس أصلا تجري غلته على المساكين. So if somebody would allocate basically a certain waqf, and that it would be designated only for the poor, but his children would basically be given some of that benefit, or I guess to use it, if, of course, when this money was allocated, they were rich or poor, but of course, they would not be given the whole thing. It would be given to them into a limited usage. Limited. So in other words, it doesn't become, it's like, oh, now they're poor. Okay, we'll give them the whole thing. No, we'll give them probably the ability to use it 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, 10 months, a year, 2 years, etc. But they would not necessarily have the right to say, well, our dad donated this and we'd like it back. They cannot say that. But what we can do, we can say you can use that property for a certain amount of time until you get yourself sorted out because you are poor, but you cannot take it back. Your father donated this, and therefore this stays as waqf. But we're poor. Yes, we'll allow you to use it during that moment just to get yourself situated, but you cannot claim to take it back. And you cannot necessarily say, well, this is a part of our dad's property. He allocated this, therefore we'd like to take it back. This cannot happen. Okay. So let's see. ولكن يبقى منه سهم للمساكين يبقى عليه اسم الحبس. So basically, we would allocate a certain area, but not the whole thing. That way, we can have a certain area assigning that that part of it was still considered as waqf, and therefore we would not give the whole thing, whether for the usage or whether for of course transitioning property. Never would it be transitioned to their property whatsoever. It would always be waqf, but we would give them a part of that building or a part of that property to use, but not necessarily the whole thing. That way we would allocate and keep that part of it was a part of al-waqf, and that they were using a part of it and not the whole thing. Okay. And of course they would be given a certain report that, hey, you're to use it to, let's say, to maybe dwell in it for this amount of time. We would make sure that we would have a written statement to make it clear that they would not have the full property and they would not basically take it back, and that this would be limited benefit and not unlimited, just to make sure that the word waqf stays and that this stays within the property of waqf, and that there wouldn't be some kind of a manipulation to take it back. Okay, is that clear? So let's go for عتق السائبة. What is عتق السائبة? And he said جائز. What? We're going back to the سائبة again. Well, what does that even mean? Okay, let me explain it. So, عتق السائبة, what is العتق? العتق means to free a slave. Okay, and السائبة, the word سائبة just means to let go. Okay, but what are we letting go here? We're just letting this slave go. Hey, you want to be freed? You're all free. But in Islam considered that you can't just let a person just go like that. Why not? Well, because the society is basically founded on a set of different circles of social relations. So in other words, if the person is basically just an individual with no backup, what kind of backup do they need? So right now, during our times, you would say that there are human services, there's the government, etc. But in Islam, in order to not carry and have the government carry the burden, it basically makes the people carry the burden. What kind of burden are we talking about? Let's say human services. Let's say something wrong happened. The person killed someone by mistake, or the person basically is homeless. The person, who knows what happened, or the person is right now sick and need of financial support. The government in a secular society, it basically wants to take over the burden. In an Islamic society, in order to not have the burden go on the government, it basically would distribute the responsibility on the people. So how does that distribution happen? It's basically dependent on the family distribution. So the family, the mother, for example, her children are responsible for her. And that way, instead of the mother going for human services and asking for the government to help them or to help her, the mother's responsibility would be on her children. So when the woman goes old, for example, the children are supposed to be the ones responsible of her shelter, responsible for her food, responsible for her medical bills, etc. The children are responsible. What if the children were not doing their duty? The government would force them to do so. The government would have the collection agency take their money and basically say, hey, we're giving that money to a guardian ad litem to oversee and make sure that your mother is getting the necessary help that she needs and from your money. So it's not just the mother, but we're speaking about, just like in America, for example, they would have the children would have child support. In Islam, it's not just the children that would have child support, but there's also family support. The government would force family support. The government would force not only speaking about daily income or, let's say, daily expenses, but we're speaking about other reasons. Let's say you hit somebody's car. You didn't mean to hit their car. So in that situation, there would be al-aqila. And let's say the damage was big. Of course, at the time, they didn't have insurance. The insurance and all of that would basically be the family itself. So that's why family ties were so important. It was considered power. It was considered a backup. So you took your family seriously, because if you didn't take them seriously and they let you basically be, let's say, separated, you're not getting their help, you end up feeling in cases of need, no one there to help you. So the family system would be not only the insurance, but it would be in case of poverty, in case of wealth, in case of they basically had to support one another. So if you're rich today, you have a responsibility to help your family basically cover their needs. Because if you don't, hey, things will change, and then we will basically isolate you if you don't do what is your responsibility towards the family. The only ones that I would, I don't know everyone in the whole world, definitely, but the Somali tribes are still actually I would say living in this type of system, and the tribal system is still strong. And this is a good thing, by the way. I know that those that had migrated to the West, they would mainly see it as a burden and always speak of tribalism like it's a negative thing. Definitely. There is some negativity into tribalism once we would take the tribe as somehow superior to others and not care for others, in probably the form of prejudice and a form of bias. Then in that situation, that would definitely be the negative area of tribalism. But in general, tribalism and the system of having that connection with the family is basically a foundation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within nature, and the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had also maintained even in Islam. Even in Islam, this system is also to maintain the support. And instead of the government being responsible, it's basically the family that is supposed to bring such ties and responsibilities to not have any person end up homeless and end up basically with no food, no water, and basically living on the street. There has to be a responsibility where it's a close responsibility, overseeing that the person is doing well with their health, overseeing that the person is doing well with their wealth, overseeing psychologically if they're needing help. So that becomes the close responsibility. The family becomes this at least the supervision to make sure that no one is left out. But the government system is definitely making many left out. Many left out, and many, we're right now seeing anxiety on the rise. We're seeing, of course, crime on the rise, and we're seeing certainly homelessness on the rise, poverty, etc., because one of the main reasons is the system and how it's built. Okay, so what about Isaiba? Why did you go into all of this when you talked about Isaiba? So Isaiba, remember that a lot of the slaves, when they were freed, that was actually going to mean that they were going to be left lonesome. In other words, there isn't a government system to give them the support. And even if we were wanting to have a government system, if we wanted to encourage freeing slaves, then that's going to be too much on the treasury, basically. That's going to be too much on the government to make sure that they have enough budget to support these people. So what happened? So in Islam, when a person is freed, they become a mawla. What does that mean? So il-mawla actually means a person that is a sayyid. Sayyid, like it's like a person that is like a leader, a person that is, so it's basically giving them an honor. Al-wilaya. An honor. So what honor do they get? They are not biologically part of the family. Let's say family Saman. Okay. They're not biologically part of that family, but they are mawali. But they are part of that grouping by another system, which is al-mawali, which basically is like an honorable, by honor, they will carry the name. By honor. By honor, the Saman family, as an example, would be responsible for this person in case they get poor, in case they end up homeless, they end up basically in trouble, etc. The Saman family, as an example, would basically carry the responsibility and say, hey, we're there to oversee the needs and oversee the situation to make sure that this person is part of us. This person is under our care. This person is under all responsibility. This person carries our name, and we are there to support them. That's the mawla. Islam did not leave anybody left out. So even if it's a slave that is not biologically part of the family, when they are freed, they would still be part of the family. Ya salam. They would still be part of the family. What if somebody said, Sa'iba, you're itqu Sa'iba? It's like, you know what? I'm just going to let you go. So, not a mawla? No, I'm just You're just going to go on your own. That's it. I'm just freeing you. Don't want to carry any responsibility over you, but you are just basically to be free. You figure it out yourself. Now, here's one thing. So scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether this is permissible or not. When we say whether this is permissible or not, in other words, they had debated on whether it is ethical or not. So from one angle, this person is free. But from another angle, this person is really left out on their own. So that's why they debated. That's one reason. Is it ethical? Is it not ethical? Hey, at least I freed them, but I don't want to carry the responsibility of that person. I don't want my family to carry the responsibility, but I'm letting them go. I'm freeing them. So that's that area of debate. Okay, let's see. What is famous from al-Madhab Malik, that this person, although freed and basically not a mawla per se, but a sa'iba, that they basically would carry the group of the Muslims. In other words, okay, maybe not the name of Saman or whatever it is, but this person is basically part of the Muslim Ummah. The Muslim Ummah would cover up for them. In other words, it becomes the government. So when we say وَلَاءَهُ لِجَمَاعَةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, that would simply mean the government is supposed to take responsibility. But according to Imam Malik, he would still be considered as free. So the itq, nafith. Nafith means what? It would be considered legitimate. It's a legal way of basically freeing that slave. And let's see, look at the other opinion. So there's another opinion on Malik. I want you to look at this one because you could see even one scholar, especially the Madhab Ahmad ibn Hanbal. That's why it would be important to go for, it's called for al-Mirdawi, معرفة الراجح من الخلاف. What was it? Forgot the beginning of the name, the beginning of the title. But anyhow, for al-Mirdawi, he would say Imam Ahmad, and basically saying sometimes up to 19 different narrations just on one alim. So now you could say that, hey, this is the famous opinion that Imam Malik said it would be permissible, and he would basically be I guess the ummah would basically be responsible for that person. But then you've got another opinion off the same scholar. Look at that, off the same scholar. And he said, لا يعتق أحد سائبة لأن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى عن بيع الولاء وعن هبته. Wait a minute. That's a second opinion contradictory to the first. Yes, it is contradictory, completely contradictory. What is it saying? He said, there's no such thing as a person basically freeing with no wala. What is al-wala? Al-wala, remember, when this person becomes, well, we're going to give them the honor, we'll basically be the ones to support them, we'll basically be the, etc. Al-wala, we explained it before. And the evidence he used, he said, because the Prophet ﷺ had forbid selling al-wala or even donating it. So what does that mean? So let's say Noura freed Noel, and she said, no, and you're part of the Saman family, all of that. But then she later said, you know what? Noel later on, she became a big deal. I don't know. She became a person that was maybe a rich, famous person. And Noura, let's just, hypothetically, Noura wouldn't do such a thing, but she was wanting, hey, I'll give you the wala and I'll sell you the name then that Noel carries, which is a Saman name. I'll basically sell you that, or you know what, I will give you that name and give you the honor to take somebody else's name, etc. Can I sell or give that name? Because Noel right now is a big shot right now. All right. So can I perhaps just give her another name, or maybe just somehow give the honor to someone else? And here the process element basically said that that's not permissible. So why not? Why isn't it permissible? So
Is that based on the ayah when the Prophet ﷺ wasn't allowed to adopt Zayd?
So, okay, I see where you're coming from. So that one is different. Definitely, Zayd was a mawla. But why can't we change that? It's like Noel right now, if let's say cement people, they basically said, well, we're going to free Noel, etc. Why can't we just say, okay, well, we're going to change it from a cement to, let's say, the family of a Tahan, for example, and say, Tahan family, you're going to take over. We're going to give you the honor to take Noel. And basically now she's a mawla for Tahan family and not a Saman family anymore. So there is a direct forbiddance that anybody would do that. Why not? Why is that even not allowed? So the main reason why it's not allowed is because the second that you're going to keep letting go of the people, you're basically dishonoring them. You're dishonoring that person. You're somehow this is part of al-man. You're bragging somehow. So it would be qillat adab. It would be lacking manners to somehow let go of that person and make them feel like they don't belong to you anymore. Even if you willingly and by consent had done that, Islam wanted you to never brag and never dishonor a person just because you had freed them. You have to maintain their honor. So you freed them, Jazakallah khairan, but you don't brag and you don't sell their name. You make them always have a sense of belonging, like they belong to this family, and that it does not basically get sold. It does not change. Kind of like the idea, like you had said and brought up, Noura, the Prophet said, "Ud'uhum li'abaihim." Okay, "Ud'uhum li'abaihim." You can't change your biological name. Well, not okay. Let me correct that. Not change your biological name, but your biological ancestry. You don't become a new ancestry just because someone else adopted you. Your ancestry stays the same. But you want to change your biological name. You wanted to call yourself, instead of, I don't know, Wafat. You didn't like the name Wafat. You wanted the name Iman. Okay, that's nice. You wanted to change it into a different name. That's okay. Some scholars consider that that's lacking adab because your parents chose it for you. Then stay with that name, because unless it contained shirk. Okay, but anyhow, let's stick to the point that we're talking about. Okay, so now you could see that the whole idea is to not do ilman, to not do any kind of a bragging or dishonor the person, and to let them stay as belonging to this family. Okay, so ابن عبد البر، وهذا عند كل من ذهب مذهبه، إنما هو محمول على كراهة عتق السائبة لا غير، فإن وقع نفذ، وكان الحكم فيما ذكرناه. So Ibn Abdul Barr, who's Ibn Abdul Barr? Abu Umar. Ibn Abdul Barr is basically one of the Maliki scholars. We talked about him before. And he said, so this would be this opinion that it would not be permissible. He said every person that basically adopted this opinion, they basically had said that it would be hated to basically say, you know, the type of freeing a slave as sa'iba and not necessarily mawla. But they said it's hated, but if they do so, which is free the slave without making them carry the name, he said it would still be considered as legal. In other words, it's legitimate to free the slave in that way. It's not haram, okay? It would be legitimate, but it's hated because it's seen as containing something unethical right there. Let's see. And there's that other opinion that Imam Malik had said, I hate عتق السائبة. I hate that way of letting them go, and I would forbid it. But if it does happen, it is legitimate, and basically it does take place, and it would be the responsibility of all the Muslims, and including the responsibility. عقله عليهم. عقله doesn't mean mind. العقل here, عقله عليهم, so in case maybe killed somebody by mistake, I don't know, hit someone's car by mistake, or etc., then in that situation, the family would still take responsibility. In other words, responsibility in support, basically, and this person would not be left alone. All right? Would not be left alone. So, in other words, the Jama'at al-Muslimin, the general Muslims. So, not necessarily the family that freed that person, but generally we're speaking about the Muslims. By the way, from this idea, I'm not saying completely, but from this idea, scholars actually had differences of opinions on insurance. Just a note. What are you talking about? Insurance, like auto insurance and home insurance and all that? Yes. So there was no insurance during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And scholars, modern scholars, they had debated on whether insurance is halal or haram for a number of different reasons. The first opinion considered that it's haram. Why? They said it's basically containing gharar. What is gharar? Gharar is containing some form of ambiguity / manipulation. Okay, how do these go together? So, al-gharar would be that if you were to hold me responsible for something, which I don't know what you are holding me responsible for. You said something. What is that something? So that ambiguity in Islam is the problem. If you want to charge me for something, it cannot contain any ambiguity, but it has to be clear. So that's the first opinion. They said there's ambiguity. I don't know what you're charging me for. I don't know what you're going to be holding me accountable for. So what is this business contract based on? That I'm paying, let's say, $60 a month for auto insurance, but I didn't do an accident. Yes, I know, but we'll tell you if you get into an accident, the premium is up to $15,000. We'll cover it, but then if you go beyond that, then you're going to cover it. But we still don't have an accident. We didn't. So what are you charging me for? That's the first opinion. The first opinion said there's gharar, there is an ambiguity in this transaction, and therefore haram. That's the first opinion. Second opinion, they said it was halal. Why? Like Mustafa Zarqa. He said it's halal because although, yes, there is some ambiguity, but we're saying the premium is this much, and this is a form of basically supporting one another. تواصوا بالحق تواصوا بالصبر. Said this is تواصوا بالحق. This person agreed that in case their home, they got home insurance, if their home gets burnt down, will basically cover it up to $200,000 or $300,000, whatever. and will basically cover it up for them. And this person agreed $100 a month to be paid for us. And in case anything happens, we'll basically cover up to a premium of $200,000. So in that situation, the second opinion considered that that's permissible from the angle tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Find it strange, but yeah. Contains some kind of sense, doesn't it? Okay, the third opinion said we can't be that unlimited in saying every type of insurance is halal. So what are you saying? We're saying that some insurance is halal and other is not. Like what? Well, they said if you're forced to do insurance, then in that situation, you would have no option but to do insurance because your life would be hard, like auto insurance, especially if we're talking about the liability. Auto insurance is the liability auto insurance. If you don't have that, you could
some put them in jail.
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have insurance, you might actually end up to 90 days in jail and sometimes even more. So, hey, in that situation, it's a form of ikrah. You do it or you basically lose your ability to drive, mobility, etc. Okay, so that's a third opinion. The third opinion said only to الضرورة, only to necessity, only الضرورة. But wait a minute, it's not like if they don't drive, they're going to die. Right, الحاجة in situations like this, تنزل منزلة الضرورة. What is الحاجة? الحاجة is a form of necessity, and it would be the need, and the scholars, not any random person, would say, yeah, I need that, and therefore that should be permissible. So what kind of haja are we talking about? We're talking about medical insurance. That's a haja. If you don't have medical insurance, especially in America, you are in big trouble. You're in big trouble. Just to get, I'll give you an idea of the differences of prices. Here in Malaysia, I did an MRI. The MRI costed $400. In America, it depends on what kind of an MRI you would do and how many and all of that, but it would cost you no less than $4,000. No less than $4,000. Here, costed me $400. Seen a cardiologist, a specialist, okay, costed $200 with the follow-up, with the EKG and all, a number of different tests that they had done, a lot of blood tests and a lot of that. It costed me altogether, cardiologist, including blood tests, including x-rays, including I think it was some kind of a sophisticated test. I forgot what it was, but I looked it up online in America. If I were to do that work in the US, it would cost me almost $25,000. Here in Malaysia, it costed me $1,200. Look at the difference. So in America, just imagine if you had one small problem, if you don't have medical insurance, you would end up homeless, literally. You would end up homeless. So the third opinion, the scholars that said certain insurance as a necessity is permissible, they said liability, all auto insurance, medical insurance, and home insurance. And of course, that they didn't go as far as insurance on your, on your laptop, and insurance on your, on your furnace or whatever it is. Okay. They didn't go that far. They just said, we're speaking about limited things where, yes, it is really serious. Okay. So just wanted to mention these three opinions. And I don't know why I got there, but anyhow. Okay. How did I get there? Can somebody explain to me? I really went off track.
Hey, we're learning. Alhamdulillah.
Oh, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, there we go. So I didn't do anything wrong. Thank you, Nora, for coming up as the supporter. Okay, let's see. Where was I? Yeah, so عقله عليهم. This is what we wanted to say. وقال أصبغ. أصبغ. That's a different name, isn't it? Oh, we're going to talk about أصبغ in just a bit. He said it is permissible to basically free the slave in سائبة, basically, not necessarily المولى. And he said, just, ابتداءً, meaning what? It's permissible, period. When you say ابتداءً, it's like it's permissible, period. We can't necessarily say it is makruh. And of course, and the evidence, he said it was a common practice in Medina, and there was no specific scholar that had said that it was hated. And Abdullah ibn Umar, in a number of different salaf basically means sahaba, basically means the good ulama, they also had freed in sa'iba. And this is the opinion of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, Abil Ali, Ata, Amr ibn Dinar, and those are key scholars. So he said, and even in fact, Abu Ali al-Riyahi, I'm going to talk about these scholars, okay? He basically was one of those people that was even freed in Sa'iba. And the woman that had freed him was basically his female master, and she went on to the different masajid, and she started going to different masajid and saying, Rufayya, is that not Rafi'? Rufayya ibn Mahran, which basically is Abu al-Aliya, that he was freed. She would go around and say he's freed. Wait a minute. So we got two names here to discuss. We can't skip those names. We got number one was Asbagh, and the second one is Abu al-Aliya. We need to know who these people are, right? So I already looked them up for you that we won't waste time. And we go back to, let's see, right there. This is Asbagh ibn al-Faraj. Okay, what are we using here? We're using Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. What is Siyar A'lam al-Nubala for Dhahabi? Remember, every time we go to that book, because he'd done an outstanding job. Okay, who's Asbagh ibn al-Faraj? So he said, Al-Shaykh al-Imam al-Kabir. It's basically a sheikh and a major scholar, and he was even the main mufti for Egypt. Okay, and he was Maliki. He was born 150-year Hijriya. He started seeking ilm when he was an older man. So he didn't make it to see Malik, Imam Malik and Layth ibn Sa'd, but he basically, because remember, he was born after 150-year Hijrah, plus he started seeking ilm when he was an older Shabun Kabir. So we're looking at 25. So that would be a Shabun Kabir. Okay, so not from his early childhood. Okay, so let's see. Those are some of the scholars that basically had that he had learned from. Let's see. He said, أصبغ ثقة صاحب سنة. Ahmed ibn Abdullah basically said Asbagh is thiqa. What is thiqa? Thiqa means a person that is a high level in their mannerisms, high level in their deen, someone that we could depend on, someone that we could trust, basically. Sahibu sunnah, he had a certain sunnah that he would do, a certain sunnah that he would practice regularly. Okay, so it wasn't a bid'ah, but it was something that he would practice regularly. Abu Hatim, he said he was one of the most important كان أجل أصحابي Ibn Wahb. Ibn Wahb was basically one of the Maliki scholars. He said he was one of the best ones of the Maliki scholars, basically students, Ibn Wahb. And those, can you change the cursor? Sure. I can change this. Oh, maybe I could do this, Laura. We could do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I could do that. Sorry about that, Noura. Okay, let's make the story short. Let's see. And I'm just going to let's see, when did he die? Let's see. So Asbagh basically he ended up, of course, going through some kind of a mihna. I don't know what the mihna is, to be honest, but it seems like it's a government, some kind of a government pressure. So he basically ran away because who knows what exactly the political pressure was. So then they could not trace him, and he was in Hulwan in Masr, in Egypt. Okay, so didn't really know much about that. Now let's go for Abu al-Aliya. Abu al-Aliya is rather more interesting. Let's go for Abu al-Aliya for a bit. So Abu al-Aliya, we were reading Rufayya ibn Mahran. I don't know if it's Rafi' or Rufayya, so let's just leave it at that. And by the way, a lot of times they can have differences of opinions on how the name is pronounced, okay? So that's common, that they can have differences of opinions on how the name is, just like, is it Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab or ibn al-Musayyib, and what did he really prefer, etc. They had differences of opinions on that, and what was the common name, etc. So, just keep that in mind. Good. Was Abu al-Aliya, al-Imam al-Muqri al-Hafiz al-Mufassir. He was, Nora wanted me to change the cursor, so let's do that. Okay, and what we're going to do, hold on, how do you do this? Okay, it doesn't want to change the cursor. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you, Nora, don't worry. I'm going to let you see it. Okay, here we go. Okay, so Rafi' ibn Mahran, al-Imam al-Muqri al-Hafiz al-Mufassir. Abu al-Aliya al-Riyahi al-Basri. Also originally from Basra. But remember, he himself, why are we talking about him? Because he himself was a sa'iba. Okay? He was a sa'iba. Remember what sa'iba was? Sa'iba means he was a freed slave, and he did not carry the family's name that had freed him. Okay? He was left basically like that. Okay? He was a mawla لامرأة من بني رياح بن يربوع. So he was basically a slave to a woman from Bani Riyah. Okay, what about him? He أسلم في خلافة أبي بكر الصديق. So he was alive during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but he wasn't a Muslim yet. But he was a young man during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but didn't embrace Islam until after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and in particular during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And he basically دخل عليه. In other words, he also had met Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and right there, and even heard from Umar ibn al-Khattab, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Abu Dhar, Ibn Mas'ud, Aisha. So basically heard from a number of different Sahaba and learned from them. What else? So he also memorized the Quran and read it off Ubay ibn Ka'b. Who's that? Ubay ibn Ka'b is one of Kuttab al-Wahy. Ubay ibn Ka'b, the Prophet ﷺ would order Ubay ibn Ka'b to actually write the Quran. So Abu al-Aliya would basically learn off the person that the Prophet ﷺ had designated to be one of the scribers of the Quran. And let's say, تصدر لإفادة العلم. Basically one of the key figures that was teaching ilm. And of course, a number of different scholars had basically learned from Abu al-Aliya. Let's say, Abu Amr al-Dani, he's one of the main qurra. He basically said, أخذ أبو العالية القراءة عرضا عن أبي وزيد وابن عباس. يا سلام. What happened? So Abu Amr al-Dani. Abu Amr al-Dani is one of the main qurra al-Ashr. He basically said, Abu al-Aliya had taken the Quran عرضا. عرضا means directly. عرضا, directly from Ubay ibn Ka'b, which is the Sahabi that was considered as Kuttab, the scribers of the Quran, and Zayd ibn Thabit, who basically later collected all that was scribed of the Quran and basically put it in one copy, and Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the Prophet ﷺ's cousins, and also, of course, direct the Sahabi that the Prophet ﷺ had made dua. اللهم فقهه في الدين وعلمه التأويل. Let's see. Abu al-Aliya had said, قال قتادة قال أبو العالية قرأت القرآن بعد وفاة نبيكم ب10 سنين. Said, I had read the Quran after the death of your Prophet ﷺ in 10 ب10 سنين, like after 10 years. Okay, let's see. And he said, قال لي أبو العالية, I had read the Quran on Umar ibn al-Khattab 3 times. Just imagine you're reading the Quran for Umar ibn al-Khattab. Just imagine. Okay.
When was this written again?
We mean this book?
Yeah.
This book is written in the 7th century Hijrah, but of course he was telling you right there.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So this book itself, Sir A'lam al-Nubala, was written 7th century Hijrah for Dhahabi. Okay, but that's why he's telling you the different narrations. So he wasn't there. Dhahabi himself wasn't there. 700 and some years had already passed. Okay, or 600 and some years, because had already passed. But he's telling you the narration where he's getting this information from. So Dhahabi was collecting this information from other resources and basically making it available to you. Okay, but certainly Abu al-Aliya was one of the tabi'een, way early tabi'een, because he had seen the Prophet ﷺ, but he wasn't Muslim when he had seen the Prophet ﷺ. He didn't become Muslim until the time of Bakr as-Siddiq, but he had learned the Quran from the Sahaba, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, Abdullah ibn Abbas, here Umar ibn al-Khattab as well. So now we could see that basically this person, now we could see this person, we're speaking about one of the earliest scholars of Al-Quran right there. Okay, let's see. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud, he said, وَلَيْسَ أَحَدٌ بَعْدَ الصَّحَابَةِ أَعْلَمُ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ أَبِي الْعَالِيَةِ. So there's no other one after the Sahaba that knows the Quran better than Abu al-Aliya. And then later Sa'id ibn Jubayr, who died 95 Hijriya. Okay, and let's see. I'm just gonna, okay, look at this one. This is a note I wanted you to see. He said, Abu Khalid ibn Dara, he said, سمعت أبا العالي يقول كنا عبيدا مملوكين منا من يؤدي الضرائب ومنا من يخدم أهله فكنا نختم كل ليلة فشق علينا حتى شكى بعضنا إلى بعض فلقينا أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فعلمونا أن نختم كل جمعة فصلينا ونمنا ولم يشق علينا. What happened? He said, we were slaves. And some of us were paying certain taxes, and some of us basically certain taxes because they wanted to free themselves. And some of us were basically doing the different services for their people. So he said every single day we were reading the Quran, and it became so hard on us to complete reading the Quran every single day, complete, cover to cover. It was too much. So they met the Prophet ﷺ's companions, and they taught him to complete the Quran at least once a week. He said, فَصَلَّيْنَا وَنِمْنَا. Said, so then we were capable of praying, we were capable of sleeping, and it was not hard on us anymore. That's a lot. Reading the Quran a whole in 1 week. In 1 week. Okay. So how long is it supposed to take you to read in order to complete it in 1 week? That'll be
you would have to divide it.
I would have to divide it, right? So 604 and then 604 pages. And you're going to have to divide how many juz'u in order to read it. Okay. So if we're talking about 30 divided by, in order to do it in 7 days. Okay. So you're going to have to read almost 7.5 or 7 and something ajza per day. Okay. All right. قال, let's go. Okay, now we're just going to, because we're definitely passing all the time. Okay, let's see. قال أبو جعفر الرازي عن الربيع ابن أنس عن أبي العالية قال كنت أرحل إلى الرجل مسيرة أيام لأسمع منه فأتفقد صلاته فإن وجدته يحسنها أقمت عليه وإن أجده يضيعها رحلت ولم أسمع منه وقلت هو لما سواها أضيع. He said, I would travel for a couple days in order to hear from a scholar, but I would see how this person is praying. If this person is perfecting his prayer, I would stay with that person to learn from them. But if they're not perfecting their prayer, I would just let go and I would just move on and not hear anything and not learn from that person, because he would say, well, if he's not keeping track of his prayers, he really keeping track of anything else, of his ilm. So, yes.
So that was just like, what did that mean? Praying on, like,
praying on
what do you mean
time.
perfecting? Oh, okay.
Praying on time. Taking the time to really do your khushu', taking the time to do your tahara, taking the salah seriously, not, your person's probably watching movies or whatever it is, and basically delaying salah because they have a movie to watch. Because that person doesn't even care about their prayer, let alone care about anything else. Okay. All right. So let's see. أبي العالية قال تعلمت الكتابة والقرآن فما شعر بي أهلي ولا رؤي في ثوبي مداد قط. Okay. What happened? So Abil Ali wanted to say he had learned writing and reading al-Quran, and none of his family members had even known about that. And in fact, they didn't even see ink on his clothes, because he wanted to make sure that he would be sincere as much as he can. You're right? To be sincere. Let's see. Here's another story. عن أبي العالية قال تعلموا القرآن فإذا تعلمتموه فلا ترغبوا عنه. Abil Ali had taught them, learn the Quran. If you had learned the Quran, then don't get distracted from it. Don't let anything distract you, basically. وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَهَذِهِ الْأَهْوَاءِ. If you want to keep your Quran, be careful in warning them from all the different desires, because the different desires would basically create animosity and frictions between you. And what happened? فإن قد قرأنا القرآن قبل أن يقتل عثمان ب15 سنة. Okay, so he wanted to say, before, of course, when they were reading the Quran, they were basically connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they were reducing the speech and the ummah was united. It isn't until they had reduced reading the Quran that, of course, they went into the frictions within the ummah, and that basically ended up Uthman bin Affan getting killed, and later on, of course, all the fitan basically happening after that. Okay, and I'm just going to right there, end it, inshallah. This is the one I also wanted to mention. عن أبي العالية, look at this one. This is, and we'll end it right here, inshallah. عن أبي العالية قال إن الله قضى على نفسه أن من آمن به هداه وتصديق ذلك في كتاب الله ومن يؤمن بالله يهدي قلبه ومن توكل عليه كفاه وتصديق ذلك في كتاب الله ومن يتوكل على الله فهو حسبه ومن أقرضه جازاه وتصديق ذلك في كتاب الله من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له أضعافا كثيرة ومن استجار من عذابه أجاره وتصديق ذلك في كتاب الله واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا والاعتصام الثقة بالله ومن دعاه أجابه وتصديق ذلك في كتاب الله وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداع إذا دعان. What did he want to say? He said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken it upon himself that whoever believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him guidance. And what affirms that is basically an ayah in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he said, and whoever believes in Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give his heart guidance. And whoever depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that should be enough. And what affirms that is basically an ayah in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever depends on Allah, then that should suffice. وَمَنْ أَقْرَضَهُ جَازَهُ, and whoever would donate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would compensate them. And what affirms that is basically an ayah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, whoever would donate for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a good donation, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would multiply the compensation and the reward of it. And whoever seeked refuge from the torments of hellfire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically protect them. And to affirm that, it's basically mentioned in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he had said, and hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in oh dear, where'd it go? Okay, here we go. In وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. So hold on to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in union basically. And al-i'tisam and holding on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically having confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whoever invokes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer their prayer. And the evidence to prove that is basically the ayah in the Quran. And وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. And if my servants ask you about me, tell them I am, or don't, it didn't say tell them, but it directly said, for I am near. I would answer the call of invocation if they would invoke. Okay, so this is a little bit about Abu al-Aliya, just so that we would know who Abu al-Aliya is. And he died 93-year hijrah, or 106, or 106. So different opinions exactly what date are we talking about. You could see differences of opinions, but this is just an idea about Abu al-Aliya. Now we never forget Abu al-Aliya, right? So this is it, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah.
The reason why I asked when this was written, because I wondered, because in the Quran it uses sana for the bad years. So I wondered when, I wondered when they started using sana instead of am.
So it's not that when did they actually use it. These are from al-lata'if. What does that mean? Those are usually hidden and lata'if that scholars would mention, especially in Lugha Arabiya, would mention some of these hidden secrets in Lugha Arabiya, but not necessarily you would always find it as in that distinction in the books of Sirah or the books of Lugha Arabiya. So just to note.
Oh, okay, Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, so you might see 100 sana and you're like, man, he lived such a hard life. Right?
Yeah.
So those lata'if, not everyone is aware of it. It's usually hidden latifa, it's a hidden thing. All right. So subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilaik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. We'll see you all tomorrow.
إن شاء الله. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.